The iron shackles bit into Thea Everhart's wrists as the deputy dragged her through the dusty streets of Ouray, Colorado, and she could feel every eye in town burning holes through her back. It was June of 1878, and the summer heat beat down mercilessly on the mining settlement tucked into the San Juan Mountains, but the chill of shame cut deeper than any sunburn ever could. Behind her, Marshal Prescott's voice boomed loud enough for everyone to hear, announcing her supposed crime to anyone who had not yet heard the news. "Caught red-handed in the mercantile last night," he declared, his weathered face twisted in satisfaction. This one thought she could make off with half the register and a bag of coffee beans. "We do not tolerate thieves in this town." Thea wanted to scream that she had been framed, that she had only been in the mercantile because she had heard strange sounds and gone to investigate, but no one would believe her. The evidence had been too perfect. She had been standing there with the broken lockbox at her feet and the money scattered around her when the marshal had burst through the door. Even she had to admit it looked damning. The crowd that gathered murmured and whispered as she passed. Some faces showed pity, but most showed disgust or grim satisfaction. Thea kept her head high despite the humiliation. She was 20 years old, and she had come to Ouray 6 months ago hoping to start fresh after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts in Denver. She had found work as a seamstress and had been slowly building a reputation for fine embroidery work. Now all of that was destroyed. They locked her in the small jailhouse at the edge of town, a squat wooden building that smelled of sweat and desperation. The cell was barely large enough to hold a cot and a bucket, and the single window set high in the wall let in only a sliver of light. Thea sank onto the hard cot and finally allowed herself to cry, quiet tears that she wiped away quickly. She would not give them the satisfaction of breaking her completely. The marshal left her there without another word, and hours passed in suffocating silence. Thea tried to think through what had happened. Someone had deliberately set her up, but who? She had kept to herself mostly, focusing on her work and staying out of trouble. The only person she had any conflict with was Margaret Sutton, the banker's wife, who had complained about a dress Thea had altered for her. But would a woman like that really go to such lengths over a poorly fitted bodice? As evening shadows crept across her cell, Thea heard the outer door of the jailhouse open. Heavy footsteps approached, and she looked up to see a man she had noticed around town but never spoken to. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that touched his collar. His eyes were an unusual shade of green, and right now they were studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Everhart," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the small space. "My name is Jacob Masters. I own a ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Have you come to gawk at the thief?" Thea asked, hating the bitterness in her voice but unable to suppress it. Jacob shook his head slowly. "I came to tell you that I do not believe you stole that money." Thea stood up so quickly she almost hit her head on the low ceiling. "You do not." "I was riding past the mercantile last night around the time it happened," Jacob said, moving closer to the bars. "I saw someone running from the back of the building. It was too dark to make out who it was, but I know it was a man, fairly short and stocky. That does not match you." Hope flared in Thea's chest like a struck match. "Did you tell the marshal?" "I tried," Jacob said, and his jaw tightened. "He told me I must have been mistaken, that the evidence against you was clear. But I know what I saw." "Why are you telling me this?" Thea asked, searching his face for any sign of deception. In her experience, people rarely did anything without expecting something in return. Jacob was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer. Because I have seen too many innocent people suffer when the law gets it wrong. My father was falsely accused of horse theft when I was 15. He died in a cell not much different from this one before anyone bothered to find out the truth. He paused, his eyes distant. I will not stand by and watch it happen again if I can help it. Thea felt tears prickling at her eyes again, but these were different. I do not know what to say. Do not say anything yet, Jacob replied. I am going to find out who really robbed that mercantile, and I am going to clear your name, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Thea looked at this stranger who was offering her something no one else in Ouray had, belief in her innocence. It went against every cautious instinct she had developed over the years, but something in his steady gaze made her want to take the leap. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. The corner of Jacob's mouth lifted in a small smile. Good, I will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, try to remember anything unusual you noticed in the days before this happened. Anyone acting strange, any conversations you overheard. Anything could be important. After he left, Thea lay on the cot and tried to do as he had asked. Her mind went over the past week, sifting through mundane interactions and daily routines. The only thing that stood out was that Henry Clark, who worked at the mercantile, had seemed nervous when she had come in 2 days before the robbery. He had dropped a jar of pickles and had been sweating despite the relatively cool morning. At the time, she had thought he might be coming down with something, but now she wondered. She also remembered seeing Henry talking with Roy Sullivan, a drifter who had been hanging around Ouray for the past month doing odd jobs. They had been standing in the alley beside the saloon, and when they had noticed her walking by, they had stopped talking abruptly. It might mean nothing, or it might mean everything. Thea barely slept that night, her mind too active with worry and the first tentative threads of hope. When morning light finally filtered through the high window, she heard the outer door open again. This time it was the deputy bringing her a tin plate with beans and hard bread. He would not meet her eyes as he shoved the plate through the slot in the bars. Deputy Wilson, Thea said quickly before he could leave. Please, I need you to listen to me. I did not steal that money. I was set up. Wilson's weathered face showed a flicker of something, maybe doubt or pity. That is not for me to decide, miss. The judge will be here in 2 weeks. You will get your trial. 2 weeks, Thea's voice cracked. What if the real thief is long gone by then? Then I guess you should have thought of that before you broke the law, Wilson said, but he sounded less certain than his words suggested. He left quickly, as if staying might force him to confront uncomfortable questions. Thea picked at the bland food, forcing herself to eat even though everything tasted like dust. She needed to keep her strength up. An hour later, she heard familiar footsteps and looked up to see Jacob returning, this time with a basket covered with a checkered cloth. I brought you something better than whatever slop they are feeding you, he said, setting the basket on the small shelf outside her cell. He uncovered it to reveal fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of what looked like strawberry preserves. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, made the bread this morning. She is from San Francisco and the best cook in 3 counties. You did not have to do this, Thea said, but she could not hide how the sight of real food made her mouth water. I know I did not have to, Jacob replied, passing the items through the bars. I wanted to. As Thea took the food gratefully, Jacob pulled up the deputy's stool and sat where he could see her clearly. Did you remember anything that might help? Thea told him about Henry Clark's nervous behavior and the strange conversation with Roy Sullivan. Jacob listened intently, his eyes sharpening with interest. Henry has worked at that mercantile for about 3 years, Jacob said thoughtfully. He always seemed honest enough, but I heard he has been having money troubles. His mother is sick and needs medicine that costs more than he makes." "And Roy Sullivan?" Thea asked. "I have been asking around about him this morning," Jacob said. "He showed up in town about a month ago with no clear story about where he came from. He does odd jobs but always seems to have enough money for whiskey. That does not add up." "Do you think they work together?" Thea leaned forward, her heart beating faster. "It would make sense," Jacob said. "Henry has access to the mercantile and knows its routines. Roy could be the muscle, the one who actually carried out the robbery, and then they needed someone to take the fall." "But why me?" Thea asked, the question that had been haunting her since this nightmare began. Jacob's expression darkened. "You are new in town, you are alone with no family to defend you, and you are a woman. Some men think that makes you an easy target." He stood up, determination etched in every line of his body. "But they were wrong. You have someone in your corner now." The simple declaration sent warmth flooding through Thea's chest. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to watch Henry and Roy," Jacob said. "If they did this together, they might still be in contact. Criminals get comfortable when they think they have gotten away with something. They get sloppy." "Be careful," Thea said, surprised by how much she meant it. This man was still essentially a stranger, but he was the only person fighting for her. Jacob's green eyes softened. "I will be. You just hold on. I am going to get you out of here." For the next 3 days, Jacob visited every morning and evening, always bringing food and updates. He told her he had been observing Henry and Roy from a distance. The two men had met twice in the alley behind the saloon, always after dark, always glancing around nervously. Jacob had not been able to get close enough to hear what they were saying, but the secretive nature of their meetings suggested they had something to hide. Thea found herself looking forward to Jacob's visits with an intensity that surprised her. In this dark, lonely cell, he was like a beam of sunlight. He did not just talk about the investigation either. He told her about his ranch, about the horses he raised and trained, about the mountains that he loved. He had inherited the land from his uncle 3 years ago and had built it up from almost nothing into a thriving operation. "After my father died, I drifted for a while," Jacob admitted one evening as the light faded outside. "I was angry at the world, at the injustice of it all. But my uncle gave me a purpose. He taught me that the best revenge against darkness is to build something good." "Is that what you are doing for me?" Thea asked quietly. "Getting revenge against darkness?" Jacob looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them in the shadows of the jailhouse. Something neither of them could quite name yet, but both of them felt. "Maybe at first," he said honestly, "but not anymore." Before Thea could ask what he meant, Deputy Wilson appeared at the door. "Time to go, Masters. The marshal does not like you spending so much time with the prisoner." Jacob stood reluctantly. "I will see you tomorrow morning." That night, lying in the darkness, Thea admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling for Jacob Masters. It was foolish and dangerous and completely impractical given her circumstances, but her heart did not seem to care about practical concerns. He had looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth fighting for, and that was something she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. The next morning, Jacob arrived earlier than usual, and Thea could see immediately that something had changed. His eyes were bright with excitement. "I heard them," he said without preamble. "I hid near the alley last night, close enough to listen. Roy was getting nervous, saying they should leave town before the trial, but Henry said they needed to wait, that leaving now would look suspicious." "Did they confess?" Thea asked, gripping the bars. "Not in so many words," Jacob admitted. "But Roy mentioned splitting the money once things cooled down. That is as good as a confession in my book." "But it is not enough for the marshal," Thea said, her brief surge of hope deflating. No, Jacob agreed, but I have an idea. It is risky and I need your permission before I do anything. What is it? Jacob moved closer to the bars, lowering his voice. I am going to tell Roy that I know what he did, that I have proof. I think he will panic and go to Henry. If we can get them to discuss the robbery where someone official can overhear, we will have what we need. That could be dangerous, Thea said, fear clutching at her throat. What if he tries to hurt you? I can handle myself, Jacob assured her. I have dealt with worse than Roy Sullivan. Jacob. Thea reached through the bars and did something she had been wanting to do for days. She touched his hand. His fingers immediately closed around hers, warm and strong. Please be careful. I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Nothing is going to happen to me. But Thea, I need to know. When you get out of here, and you will get out, what will you do? Will you stay in Ouray? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Thea knew what he was really asking. I have nowhere else to go, she said softly. But this town thinks I am a thief. I do not know if I could rebuild my life here, even if my name is cleared. You could build a life somewhere else nearby, Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. You could build it with someone who sees you for who you really are. Thea's breath caught. Jacob. I know the timing is terrible, he continued. I know you are locked in a cell and your whole world is upside down, but I need you to know that I am not doing this just to right a wrong. I am doing this because somewhere in the last few days you became important to me, more important than I ever expected. Tears spilled down Thea's cheeks. You barely know me. I know enough, Jacob said firmly. I know you are brave. I know you did not let this place break you even when you had every right to fall apart. I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, it feels like the sun coming out. He paused, his green eyes intense. And I know that I want the chance to learn everything else. I want that too, Thea whispered, more than anything. Jacob lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. Then let me finish this. Let me bring you home. Home. The word resonated in Thea's chest like a bell. She had not had a real home since her father died, had not felt like she belonged anywhere. But the way Jacob said it made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have that again. Do what you need to do, she said. I trust you. Jacob left shortly after, and Thea spent the rest of the day in an agony of waiting and worry. She tried to occupy herself by doing what little exercises she could in the confined space, but her mind kept conjuring terrible scenarios. What if Roy attacked Jacob? What if the plan went wrong and Jacob ended up in trouble with the law himself? What if this all backfired and made everything worse? Evening came with no word. Deputy Wilson brought her dinner and left without speaking. Thea could not eat, her stomach twisted in knots. She paced her small cell like a caged animal, listening for any sound from outside. Night fell, and still Jacob did not come. Thea told herself that was probably good, that he was likely executing his plan, but the silence was torture. She lay on the cot and stared at the dark ceiling, praying to a God she was not sure was listening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard shouting outside. Multiple voices, angry and loud. Thea rushed to the high window, standing on tiptoe on the cot to see out. Torches flickered in the darkness, and she could make out figures moving in the street. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The jailhouse door burst open, and Marshal Prescott strode in, his face thunderous. Behind him came Deputy Wilson, Jacob, and two other men dragging Henry Clark and Roy Sullivan. Both of the prisoners looked furious and terrified in equal measure. "Lock these two up," the marshal barked to Wilson. "And someone get Miss Everhart out of that cell." Thea could hardly believe what she was hearing. Wilson fumbled with his keys and opened her cell door. She stepped out on shaking legs, hardly daring to hope. "What happened?" she asked. Jacob was at her side immediately, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "The plan worked. I confronted Roy and told him I had seen him running from the mercantile. He panicked and went straight to Henry. They met in the alley, and I had convinced Deputy Wilson to come with me to listen. They confessed to everything. Roy needed money to pay gambling debts, and Henry needed money for his mother's medicine. They figured they could kill two birds with one stone by robbing the mercantile and framing someone else." "Why me?" Thea asked, looking at Henry with bewilderment. Henry would not meet her eyes, but Roy sneered at her. "You were convenient. No family, no friends, nobody to raise a fuss." "That is enough out of you," Marshal Prescott snapped. He turned to Thea, and to his credit, he looked genuinely remorseful. "Miss Everhart, I owe you an apology. I should have investigated more thoroughly before jumping to conclusions. You are free to go." Thea should have felt triumphant, but mostly she just felt drained. "What happens now?" "You return to your life," the marshal said. "The charges against you are dropped. Your name will be cleared publicly, and I will make sure everyone in Ouray knows you were innocent." "Thank you," Thea said quietly. As the marshal and deputy processed Henry and Roy, Jacob gently guided Thea outside. The night air was cool and sweet, and after days in that cell, the open sky above felt impossibly vast. Thea breathed deeply, feeling like she was filling her lungs properly for the first time in days. "You did it," she said, turning to Jacob. "You actually did it." "We did it," he corrected. "Your information about Henry and Roy was what gave me the lead I needed." They stood together in the quiet street, and Thea realized she was still holding onto his arm. She should probably let go, should step back and maintain some proper distance, but she could not make herself do it. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her earlier question but meaning something completely different this time. Jacob understood. He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face gently. "Now I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. No thinking about what you should say or what is proper, just what you truly want." Thea's heart was racing again, but this time with anticipation rather than fear. "All right. Will you come home with me?" Jacob asked. "Not just for tonight, but for as long as you want to stay. I have a ranch that is too big for one person, rooms that echo with emptiness. I have a life that is good but incomplete. I want to share all of it with you." He paused, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. "I am not asking you to marry me right this second, though I hope that is where we are heading. I am asking you to give us a chance to see where this goes. What do you say?" Thea thought about her little rented room above the general store, about the life she had been trying to build in Ouray. It had been lonely and small, defined more by what she did not have than what she did. Jacob was offering her something completely different. He was offering her possibility. "What about propriety?" she asked. "People will talk if I move to your ranch." "Mrs. Chen lives in the main house," Jacob said. "She will be your chaperone until you decide whether you want me around permanently. And honestly, Thea, after what you have been through, anyone who wants to gossip about your living arrangements can answer to me." Thea smiled, really smiled for the first time in days. "In that case, yes, I want to come home with you." Jacob's answering smile was bright enough to light up the dark street. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she was something precious. Thea rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. This was real. This was happening. She was safe, she was free, and she was being offered a future she had not dared to dream about. They stood like that for a long moment before Jacob finally pulled back. "Let me take you to get your things. We can head out to the ranch tonight if you are up for it, or we can get you a room at the hotel and leave in the morning." Tonight, Thea said decisively. I do not want to spend another minute in this town right now. Jacob nodded his understanding. They walked together to the small boarding house where Thea had been renting a room. The landlady, Mrs. Porter, answered the door with obvious surprise at seeing Thea free. News clearly had not spread yet. I am leaving, Thea told her simply. I will collect my things now, Mrs. Porter sputtered something about rent and proper notice, but Jacob stepped forward with money in his hand, overpaying for whatever Thea might have owed. The landlady took it and wisely kept quiet. Thea did not have much to pack. Her few dresses, her sewing supplies, a handful of books, and a small wooden box containing her mother's jewelry were quickly gathered into 2 bags. Jacob carried them both despite her protests. I have a wagon at the livery, he said. Wait here while I get it. He returned quickly with a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 beautiful horses, one gray and one chestnut. He helped Thea up onto the seat, and then they were moving through the quiet streets of Ouray, leaving the town behind. Thea did not look back. The ride to Jacob's ranch took about an hour, following a winding road that climbed through foothills dotted with pine and aspen. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see the landscape around them. Thea caught glimpses of silvered meadows and dark forested slopes. The air smelled of pine resin and wildflowers. It is beautiful, she said softly. Wait until you see it in daylight, Jacob replied. The mountains here, they get into your blood. After a while, you cannot imagine living anywhere else. As they crested a rise, Thea saw the ranch spread out below them in a sheltered valley. The main house was larger than she had expected, a solid 2-story structure built of logs and stone. Several outbuildings clustered nearby. A barn, a bunkhouse, what looked like a stable, and a smokehouse. Even in the darkness, she could see the neat fences of corrals and pastures. You built all this in 3 years, she asked with genuine amazement. Not alone, Jacob said. I have 3 hands who work for me year-round, Tom, Louis, and Charlie, and Mrs. Chen, of course. During busy seasons, I hire on a few more, but yes, we have built it up together. As they approached the house, the front door opened, and a small woman with gray-streaked black hair stepped onto the porch, a lantern in her hand. This had to be Mrs. Chen. Jacob Masters, do you know what time it is? She called out, but there was affection in her voice rather than real anger. I know, Jacob said, pulling the wagon to a stop. Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Thea Everhart. She's going to be staying with us for a while. Thea, this is Lin Chen, the woman who keeps this ranch from falling into complete chaos. Mrs. Chen approached and studied Thea with keen, dark eyes. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded. You are the girl from town, the one who was falsely accused. Jacob told me about you. Come inside, child. You look exhausted. Thea climbed down from the wagon, grateful for Mrs. Chen's brisk kindness. The older woman ushered her into the house while Jacob dealt with the horses. The interior was warm and welcoming, with polished wood floors and comfortable furniture. Mrs. Chen led her upstairs to a bedroom that was simply but nicely furnished. The washroom is at the end of the hall, Mrs. Chen said. There is fresh water in the pitcher. Get some rest. Everything will look better in the morning. After Mrs. Chen left, Thea sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened. Just this morning, she had been in a jail cell facing an uncertain future. Now she was in a comfortable bedroom in a rancher's house, having been invited to stay by a man who had declared his interest in her. It felt surreal. A soft knock on the door brought her out of her reverie. Thea, can I come in? Yes. Jacob entered, leaving the door appropriately open. He had removed his hat and boots, and his hair was slightly mussed. He looked tired but happy. I just wanted to make sure you have everything you need, he said. I do, Thea assured him. Thank you, Jacob, for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you. Jacob crossed the room and took her hands in his. You do not owe me anything. I did what was right. But Thea, I want you to know that there is no pressure here. Take all the time you need to recover from what you have been through. Get to know the ranch, get to know me. And if you decide that this is not what you want, I will help you get settled wherever you want to go. Thea looked up at him, this man who had given her back her freedom and was now offering her a future. I already know I want to stay, she said softly, but I will take the time to do this right, to make sure we are both certain. Jacob smiled and lifted her hands to his lips, kissing first one and then the other. That is all I can ask. Sleep well, Thea. Tomorrow is a new beginning. After he left, Thea changed into her nightgown and slipped between clean sheets that smelled of lavender. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. She fell asleep faster than she had in weeks, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. Morning came with birdsong and sunlight streaming through the window. Thea woke feeling more rested than she had expected. She dressed in one of her simple work dresses and made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee and frying bacon. The kitchen was large and warm, with a massive iron stove and a wooden table that could easily seat a dozen people. Mrs. Chen was cooking while Jacob sat at the table reading a newspaper. He looked up when Thea entered, and his smile made her stomach flutter. "Good morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," Thea admitted, Mrs. Chen placed a plate in front of her loaded with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. "Eat," she commanded. "You are too thin. The food at that jailhouse is terrible." Thea ate gratefully while Jacob told her about the ranch routine. "The hands will be finishing up morning chores soon. I will introduce you to everyone later, but first, I thought I would give you a tour of the place if you are interested." "I would like that." After breakfast, Jacob walked her around the property. Thea was impressed by how well organized everything was. The barn was clean and well maintained. The horses in their stalls were clearly well cared for, and the equipment was in good repair. Jacob introduced her to Tom, a grizzled older man who had been a ranch hand all his life. Louis, a quiet man in his 30s who had come from New Mexico. And Charlie, who was barely 20 but handled horses like he had been born to it. All three men were polite to Thea, and she appreciated that none of them asked about what had happened in town. Jacob must have briefed them. "This is the foaling barn," Jacob said, leading her to a smaller building near the main stable. Inside were several pregnant mares in spacious stalls. "We breed horses here, mostly working stock but some with racing lines. Our foals are starting to get a good reputation in the territory." Thea watched as Jacob moved among the horses, speaking softly to each one. They clearly trusted him, leaning into his touch and nickering greetings. She could see the love he had for these animals, the care he took with them. "My uncle taught me that horses are honest," Jacob said, stroking the nose of a pretty bay mare. "They will not lie to you or betray you if you treat them right." "After what happened with my father, I appreciated that honesty." "Tell me more about your father," Thea said gently. "If you want to." They sat on hay bales in the barn, and Jacob told her the story. His father had been a farmer in Kansas, an honest man who worked hard and treated people fairly. A neighbor's horse had gone missing, and someone had claimed to see it in their barn. His father had been arrested despite his protests of innocence. The conditions in the jail had been terrible, and he had contracted pneumonia. He died before the real horse thief was caught trying to sell the animal in another county. "I was 15, Jacob said. "Old enough to understand that the world was not fair but not old enough to do anything about it. My mother died of grief within a year. I wandered for a while, angry at everything. Then my uncle found me and brought me here. He gave me purpose again." Thea reached out and took his hand. "I am so sorry you went through that. It made me who I am," Jacob said, "and it led me to you, so maybe there was a reason for it after all." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the horses moving in their stalls and the sounds of the ranch waking up around them. Thea felt a peace settling over her that she had not experienced in years. This place, with its mountains and meadows and honest work, felt like somewhere she could belong. Over the next few weeks, Thea settled into life at the ranch. Mrs. Chen taught her how to cook for a household of working men, and she discovered she had a talent for it. She also resumed her sewing, mending clothes for the ranch hands and making new curtains for the house. The men were grateful and respectful, and slowly she began to feel like part of the ranch family. But it was the time she spent with Jacob that meant the most. He taught her to ride, patiently working with her until she was comfortable on a gentle mare named Daisy. They rode out into the mountains together, and he showed her his favorite places. A meadow full of wildflowers, a stream where the water ran crystal clear over smooth stones, a promontory where you could see for miles in every direction. They talked about everything. Jacob told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to build it into something that would last for generations. Thea told him about her childhood, about her mother who had died when she was young and her father who had tried his best, but was never very good with money. She told him about the fear of being alone, of having no one to depend on. "You are not alone anymore," Jacob said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "You have me. You have Mrs. Chen and the hands. You have a home here for as long as you want it." "I know," Thea said softly. "You have given me so much, Jacob. You saved my life and gave me a future. I do not know how to thank you." Jacob turned to her, his green eyes serious. "Stop thanking me. I did not do this to earn your gratitude. I did it because from the moment I saw you in that cell, something in me recognized something in you. Like we were meant to find each other." Thea's breath caught. They had been circling this conversation for weeks, both of them aware of the growing feelings between them but neither wanting to rush into anything. But she could not deny it anymore. She was completely in love with Jacob Masters. "I feel it too," she admitted. "Every day I am here, I fall a little more in love with this place, and with you." Jacob's face lit up with joy. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm like he had done that day in the jail. "Thea, I know we have not known each other long. I know the circumstances of how we met were terrible, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about you." "What are you saying?" Thea whispered, though she thought she knew. Jacob slid off the porch bench and knelt in front of her, still holding her hand. "I am saying that I love you. I am saying that I want you to stay not just as a guest, but as my wife. I am saying that I want to build a life with you, raise children with you, grow old with you on this ranch." He paused, his voice rough with emotion. "Thea Everhart, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Thea's face, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you." Jacob surged up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "About time," she said with satisfaction. "I will start planning a wedding feast." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Jacob wanted to marry Thea as soon as possible, but she insisted on doing it properly. She sewed herself a dress of soft cream-colored silk that she ordered from Denver, with delicate embroidery on the bodice that took her hours to complete. Mrs. Chen helped her plan a celebration that would include not just the ranch hands but neighbors from surrounding homesteads. Jacob rode into Ouray to speak with the minister and to spread the word about the wedding. The town's attitude toward Thea had changed completely since the truth about the robbery had come out. People who had condemned her now wanted to make amends. Jacob made it clear that, while Thea had forgiven the town, she would not forget how quickly they had turned on her. The wedding would be at the ranch, and only those who had shown her kindness would be invited. On a bright morning in late August, Thea stood in her bedroom at the ranch and looked at herself in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, and Mrs. Chen had woven wildflowers into her hair. She looked happy, she realized with some wonder. The scared, lonely girl who had been dragged through the streets of Ouray was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had found love, who was about to start a new life. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Chen asked, appearing in the doorway. "More ready than I have ever been for anything," Thea replied. The ceremony took place in the meadow Jacob had shown her, the one full of wildflowers. Chairs had been set up for the guests, and Tom had built an arch decorated with pine boughs and more flowers. About 30 people were gathered, most of them neighbors Thea had come to know over the past weeks. Deputy Wilson was there, having become an unlikely friend after his role in exposing the real thieves. Even Marshal Prescott had come, though he still looked vaguely uncomfortable in Thea's presence. But Thea only had eyes for Jacob. He stood under the arch in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his green eyes bright with emotion as he watched her walk toward him. Tom, who was giving her away in the absence of her father, squeezed her arm encouragingly. The minister, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson who had shown Thea kindness when others had not, performed a simple but moving ceremony. When it came time for vows, Jacob spoke from the heart. "Thea, I vow to be your partner in all things. I vow to trust you with everything I own, with my heart, with my life. I vow to stand beside you in good times and bad, to believe in you when the world doubts, to love you all the days of my life. This I swear before God and everyone gathered here." Thea had to blink back tears before she could speak her own vows. "Jacob, you saved me when I had lost hope. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. I vow to love you with everything I am, to build a life with you on this land you love, to be your partner and your friend. I vow to trust you as you trusted me. This I swear before God and everyone gathered here." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed her to the applause and cheers of everyone gathered. Thea felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the food, and someone had brought a fiddle. There was dancing and laughter, and Thea found herself welcomed warmly by people who were becoming her community. Deputy Wilson even apologized again for not believing her innocence sooner. "I should have looked deeper," he said earnestly. "I should have questioned the evidence more." "You helped in the end," Thea said graciously. "That is what matters." As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Jacob took Thea's hand and led her away from the crowd. They walked up a small hill behind the house where they could see the ranch spread out below them, warm lights glowing from windows, the sounds of celebration drifting up to them on the evening breeze. "This is ours now," Jacob said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "All of it. The land, the horses, the life we are going to build." Thea leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved and complete. "Thank you for taking a chance on a woman the whole town called a thief." "Thank you for trusting a cowboy you had never met," Jacob replied. He turned her in his arms to face him. "I meant what I said in my vows, Thea. I trust you with everything I own. But more than that, I trust you with my heart. You hold it now and you always will." "Then I will guard it carefully," Thea promised, "just as you guard mine." They stood together as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars she had watched from a jail cell window not so long ago. Everything had changed. Everything was beginning. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and deep happiness. Thea threw herself into life on the ranch, learning everything she could about horses and cattle and the rhythms of the seasons. She discovered she had an eye for breeding lines and helped Jacob make decisions about which mares to breed to which stallions. Under their combined management, the ranch continued to thrive. She also became the heart of the household in a way it had never had before. Mrs. Chen remained the cook and housekeeper, but Thea brought warmth and life to the house. She planted a garden with vegetables and flowers, made curtains and quilts that added color to every room, and insisted on regular dinners where everyone on the ranch sat together at the big kitchen table. The ranch hands, who had initially been polite but distant, grew to love her. Charlie told her she was like the sister he had never had. Louis taught her Spanish words and phrases. Tom, the oldest and most reserved, started bringing her little gifts. A perfectly smooth stone from the creek, a bird's nest that had fallen from a tree, wildflowers he thought she might like for the table. But the greatest joy came in the spring of 1879, when Thea realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening after dinner, pulling him aside to their bedroom and taking his hands in hers. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. Jacob looked at her, hope and joy and a little fear all mixed together in his expression. "Are you?" "Yes," Thea confirmed. "We are going to have a baby." Jacob let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the bunkhouse. He picked Thea up and spun her around carefully, then set her down and kissed her thoroughly. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a family." "We already have a family," Thea pointed out, thinking of Mrs. Chen and the hands. "But yes, we are expanding it." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Thea did get tired more easily as the months passed. Jacob was almost comically protective, trying to keep her from doing any heavy work. Mrs. Chen and Thea often exchanged amused glances as he fussed over her. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Thea told him repeatedly. "I know," Jacob would reply, "but you are carrying the most precious thing in the world. Let me take care of you." How could she argue with that? Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1879. The labor was long and difficult, and Jacob paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal while Mrs. Chen and the doctor from Ouray attended to Thea. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the room despite Mrs. Chen's protests about propriety. Thea, exhausted and sweaty and radiant, held their newborn son in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Jacob approached almost reverently. The baby was tiny and red-faced with a shock of dark hair. When Jacob carefully held him for the first time, tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," Jacob whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at her husband holding their son with such tenderness, Thea knew what felt right. "James," she said. "James Masters, after your father." Jacob looked up at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. Your father deserved better than he got in life. This way his name lives on in a child who will be loved and protected and raised right." Jacob bent down and kissed her gently. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this, for everything." Little James was a demanding baby, colicky and fussy, but Jacob was a hands-on father in a way that surprised some of their neighbors. He walked the floors with James at night, learned to change diapers with only minimal complaining, and sang off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. "You are going to spoil him," Thea said one night, watching Jacob rock their son with infinite patience. "Good," Jacob replied. "He should know he is loved. He should never doubt it for a moment." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality of their horses, and buyers came from as far as Texas and California. Jacob was able to hire more hands and expand the breeding program. Thea managed the household and ranch accounts with a skill that impressed everyone. She also maintained her sewing work, though now she did it more for pleasure than necessity. She made beautiful quilts that she sometimes sold or gave as gifts to neighbors. Each quilt told a story in fabric. The mountains she loved, the horses that surrounded them, the family they were building. When James was 2 years old, Thea discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born in the summer of 1882. They named her Caroline after Thea's mother, and she was a calm, contented baby who seemed to find everything in the world fascinating. "Look at her watching the horses," Jacob said one afternoon, holding baby Caroline in his arms as they stood by the corral fence. "She is going to be a rider like her mother." "She is 3 months old," Thea laughed. "Give her some time," but Jacob was right. As Caroline grew, she showed a fearless love of horses that delighted her father. James, meanwhile, turned out to have his mother's eye for detail and loved helping with the books and records. They were different children, but both were loved fiercely. The years passed in a blur of seasons and small moments that added up to a life. Thea and Jacob celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered hard winters and drought summers, dealt with sick animals and difficult buyers, and all the challenges that came with running a ranch. They also experienced deep joys, watching their children grow, seeing the ranch become one of the most respected in the territory, building friendships with neighbors that lasted decades. Through it all, Thea never forgot those dark days in the Ouray jail, the feeling of being alone and accused with no one to believe in her innocence. Sometimes she would see news of similar cases, people wrongly accused with no one to defend them, and she would talk to Jacob about starting a fund to help them afford lawyers. They eventually did just that, setting aside a portion of the ranch profits each year to help others who found themselves in the situation she had once faced. "You are paying it forward," Mrs. Chen said approvingly when they told her about the fund. The older woman was in her 70s now, but still presided over the kitchen with an iron will. "I am remembering what it felt like to be helpless," Thea corrected gently, "and making sure fewer people have to feel that way." Deputy Wilson, who had eventually become Marshal Wilson after Prescott retired, worked with them to identify cases where the fund could help. It felt good to turn something terrible into something that could help others. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Jacob surprised Thea with a trip to Denver. Mrs. Chen watched the children, who were now 8 and 6, and they took the train to the city where Thea had grown up. She had not been back since her father's death. "I wanted to show you that you triumphed over that time in your life," Jacob explained as they walked the streets she had once known. "You are not the scared, desperate girl who left here. You are a successful ranch owner, a mother, a woman who has built an incredible life." They stayed in a nice hotel and attended the theater and dined at restaurants with white tablecloths and more forks than Thea knew what to do with. But her favorite part was just walking with Jacob, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. After 10 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless shared experiences, they were still each other's favorite person. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day," Jacob told her one evening as they watched the sun set over the mountains from their hotel window. "I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I know what you mean," Thea replied, leaning into his embrace. "Loving you has only grown deeper with time. You are still the man who looked at me in that jail cell and decided to believe in me. That is never going to stop mattering." They returned to the ranch renewed and grateful for the life they had built. Their children ran to meet them, chattering about everything that had happened while they were gone. Mrs. Chen had indulged them terribly, and they were full of sweets and stories. More years passed. James grew into a serious young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion. He talked about becoming a lawyer someday, wanting to help people the way his parents had helped others. Caroline remained wild and free, more comfortable on horseback than anywhere else, talking about breeding horses and running the ranch someday. "They are so different," Thea said one evening when the children were teenagers, "but they are both so good." "They learned from you," Jacob replied. "You taught them kindness and strength in equal measure." "We taught them," Thea corrected. "Everything good in this family we built together." When Thea turned 40 in 1898, they had been married 20 years. Jacob planned a huge celebration, inviting neighbors from miles around. The ranch was a showplace now, one of the premier horse breeding operations in Colorado. James was away at university studying law, but he came home for his mother's birthday. Caroline, at 16, helped organize everything with Mrs. Chen, who was now in her 90s but still sharp as a tack. At the party, surrounded by family and friends, Thea looked around at the life she had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that terrified young woman in the jail cell, certain her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the man walking toward her cell was about to change everything. Jacob must have sensed her thoughts because he appeared at her side and took her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "About how that cowboy I met 20 years ago told me he trusted me with everything he owned," Thea said softly, "and how he kept that promise every day since." "It was easy to keep," Jacob replied. "You proved yourself worthy of that trust 1,000 times over. You are still the best decision I ever made." As the party continued around them, they slipped away to their favorite spot, the hill behind the house where Jacob had brought her on their wedding night. The view was the same. The ranch spread out below, the mountains rising in the distance, the vast Colorado sky overhead. But everything else had changed. They had built something lasting here, something that would continue after they were gone through their children and the legacy of kindness they had tried to live. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked quietly. "The way we started, the circumstances?" Thea turned to him, taking his face in her hands. "Never, not for a single moment. Yes, what happened in Ouray was terrible, but it brought me to you, and everything that came after has been worth it." Jacob kissed her, and even after 20 years it still made her heart race. "I love you, Thea Masters, my partner, my wife, my best friend." "I love you too, Jacob Masters, the cowboy who saved me in every way that matters." They stood together as the stars appeared, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding, the birth of their children, thousands of ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. The future stretched ahead with more changes to come. James would graduate and start his law practice. Caroline would eventually take over the horse breeding program. There would be grandchildren, new challenges, losses, and victories. But through it all, they would face everything together, just as they always had. The story that had started in a jail cell with an act of faith had become a love that would last a lifetime. Jacob had trusted Thea with everything he owned, and she had trusted him with her broken, desperate heart. They had built something beautiful from those humble beginnings, and neither of them would change a single thing. As they walked back down to the house where their daughter was probably organizing the party cleanup with military precision, and their friends were still celebrating, Thea squeezed Jacob's hand. He squeezed back, a silent conversation that needed no words. After 20 years together, Some things did not need to be said out loud. But that night, lying in bed with Jacob's arms around her, Thea did say the words that still felt important even after all this time. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for saying yes," Jacob replied sleepily. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who fell in love with a woman in a jail cell. Thank you for being my home. Home." The word still resonated like it had all those years ago. Thea had finally found her home, not in a place but in a person, in a family, in a life they had created together against all odds. She had been branded a thief by people who did not know her, but Jacob had seen the truth. He had trusted her with everything, and that trust had transformed both of their lives. As she drifted off to sleep, safe and loved, Thea sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had led her to that jail cell, to the man who would change everything, to the life she never could have imagined but now could not imagine being without. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best things. Sometimes trust was the greatest gift you could give or receive. And sometimes, just sometimes, love really did conquer all. Years continued to pass at the ranch, each one bringing its own mixture of challenges and blessings. James did become a lawyer, opening a practice in Denver that specialized in defending those who could not afford representation. He had inherited his parents' passion for justice and worked tirelessly to ensure that what had happened to his mother never happened to anyone else if he could prevent it. He married a schoolteacher named Sarah, and they gave Thea and Jacob 3 grandchildren who visited the ranch every summer. Caroline took over more and more of the horse breeding operations as Jacob's health began to slow in his 50s. She had her father's instinct for horses and her mother's head for business, and under her management, the ranch reached new heights. She eventually married a veterinarian named Robert who moved to the ranch and became an invaluable part of the operation. They had 2 children, both girls, who grew up riding almost before they could walk. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 96, and the entire ranch mourned her loss. She had been the backbone of their household for decades, and her absence left a hole that could never quite be filled. They buried her in the small cemetery on the ranch property, under an aspen tree she had loved. Thea planted roses around her grave and tended them carefully every year. Tom, Louis, and Charlie all eventually retired from ranch work, but they stayed in the area, and Jacob made sure they were taken care of. Charlie opened a blacksmith shop in Ouray. Louis bought a small homestead where he raised sheep. Tom lived in a little house on the ranch property and spent his days fishing and whittling. They remained friends until the end of their days, bound by years of shared work and mutual respect. On their 30th anniversary in 1908, Jacob's hair was silver and Thea's had gone mostly gray, but they were still healthy and active. They celebrated with their children, grandchildren, and a whole community that had come to respect and love them. The story of how they met had become something of a legend in the area. The falsely accused woman and the cowboy who believed in her, who built a legacy of trust and love. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," their granddaughter Emily begged during the party. She was James's oldest, a bright girl of 10 who loved stories. Thea looked at Jacob, and he nodded encouragingly. So she told it again, not glossing over the fear and desperation she had felt in that jail cell, but emphasizing the hope that Jacob had brought, the trust he had offered, the life they had built together. "The lesson," she told Emily and the other grandchildren who were listening, "is that sometimes the people who see us most clearly are not the ones we have known the longest. Sometimes a stranger can look past the circumstances and see the truth." Your grandfather did that for me, and it changed my life. And mine, Jacob added, pulling Thea close. Your grandmother made me believe in second chances and new beginnings. She taught me that trust, real trust, is the foundation of everything good. As the party wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed, Thea and Jacob once again found themselves on their hill, looking out over the ranch that had been their life's work. They were older now, slower, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. "Do you remember what you said to me in that jail cell?" Thea asked. "The very first thing," Jacob thought for a moment, then smiled. "I said I did not believe you stole that money." "No, before that. You said your name was Jacob Masters and you owned a ranch. That is how you introduced yourself. Just a straightforward statement of who you were." "I remember," Jacob said. "What about it?" "I remember thinking how confident you sounded," Thea said. "How certain of your place in the world. I had lost all sense of who I was, locked in that cell. And you came in knowing exactly who you were and what you stood for. That gave me something to hold on to." Jacob turned to face her, his green eyes still bright despite the years. "I knew who I was, but I did not know who I could be until I met you. You showed me that. You turned a lonely ranch into a home. You turned an angry young man still carrying his father's ghost into a husband and father. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "Then we saved each other," Thea said softly. "Yes," Jacob agreed. "We did." They stood together as they had stood so many times before, watching the stars emerge and the ranch settle into quiet for the night. The horses were in their stalls, the cattle in their pastures, the family safe in the house. Everything was as it should be. In the years that followed, Jacob's health did begin to decline. He had worked hard his entire life, and the toll showed in aching joints and a heart that struggled to keep up with his will. But he remained sharp and engaged, taking joy in his grandchildren and pride in the ranch that continued to thrive under Caroline's management. Thea stayed by his side through everything, just as she had promised 35 years before. When he had bad days, she was there. When he struggled to do things that had once been easy, she helped without making him feel diminished. They had built a partnership based on trust and love, and nothing, not even failing health, could diminish that. On a quiet afternoon in the spring of 1913, Jacob and Thea sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets despite the relatively warm weather. Jacob was 72, Thea 55. The ranch stretched out before them, green with new grass and dotted with mares heavy with foals. "It is still the most beautiful place in the world," Jacob said softly. "It is," Thea agreed. "We built something good here, Jacob, something that will last long after we are gone." Jacob took her hand, his grip still strong despite everything. "I have no regrets, Thea, none. Every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days," she teased gently. "Especially the hard days," Jacob replied. "Anyone can love someone when everything is easy, but we loved each other through drought and loss, through worry and fear. That is what made it real." They sat in comfortable silence, and Thea felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever came next, they had lived fully. They had loved deeply. They had raised good children and built something lasting. What more could anyone ask from a life? Jacob passed away peacefully in his sleep that summer, with Thea beside him. The ranch and the surrounding community mourned the loss of a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched in small and large ways. Thea grieved deeply but did not let it break her. Jacob would not have wanted that. Instead, she poured herself into the ranch, working alongside Caroline to ensure that everything Jacob had built continued to thrive. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, and making sure they knew the legacy of integrity and kindness he had left behind. She lived another 20 years after Jacob's death, staying active and engaged until the very end. She was there to see great-grandchildren born, to see James argue cases before the state Supreme Court, to see Caroline's horses win championships across the West. The ranch remained a family operation, passed down through the generations just as Jacob had dreamed. When Thea finally passed away in her sleep at the age of 75 in 1933, she was surrounded by family who loved her. Her children and grandchildren gathered to say goodbye to a woman who had taught them about resilience, about love, about the power of trust and belief in the face of doubt. They buried her next to Jacob in the ranch cemetery, under the cottonwood trees that had grown tall over the decades. The stone was simple. Thea Masters, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was trusted and she was worthy. Next to it, Jacob's stone read, Jacob Masters, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He saw truth when others saw only lies. Together, even in death, they represented something larger than themselves. A love story that had started in the darkest of circumstances and had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch continued to operate for generations, and the story of how it began was passed down to each new child born into the family. The woman had been branded a thief. The cowboy had said he trusted her with everything he owned. From that simple beginning, they had built an empire of love, family, and legacy that outlived them both. Their trust in each other had been the foundation of everything good that came after. Proof that sometimes taking a chance on someone, believing in them when no one else will, can change not just one life but countless lives for generations to come. And in the mountains of Colorado, on a ranch that still bore their mark, their story lived on, a testament to the transformative power of trust, faith, and love that refused to be broken by the judgment of others. They had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had created the best of lives. That was their legacy, and it would never be forgotten.